Welcome everyone to Ex-Execs. We are three former executives, although we don't think we're ex anything. We're still in the mix and we're also doing very exciting things. We are coming to you from different parts of the UK. So first of all, Robin from the Sands of Dorset. Tell us about yourself, Robin.
So I'm the highly enthusiastic, non-executive director, executive coach who loves to hike while pondering history.
And why are we here, Robin?
Between the three of us, we've got 90 years of experience at the coalface, working in complex corporate environments, and we want to share all of that experience, all of those war stories with you.
Great, thank you. So from the Sands of Dorset to the Sands of Egypt. Tarek, tell us about yourself.
I am an amateur musician.
Too modest.
There's a subject to get into.
But I'm basically a corporate person for most of my life, mainly with multinationals all over the world, both in financial services and in a private corporation. Trustee, charity advisor, non-exec director, visiting professor, and human.
And who are we for in this? Who should be listening to us?
I believe it's going to be people that, in a variety of levels, if you will, people that are coming into the workforce and trying to navigate, people that are mid-level and potentially future leaders, and potentially existing leaders as well, who need perhaps a refresher or a reminder of key things that were important for them as they went through their career. So I think it's a broad spectrum, men and women all over the world.
Beautiful, thank you. And I used to be from the beautiful beaches of South Australia, but now I'm back in the UK in the freezing north. But my name is John. I've been a CEO in the UK and in Australia running very complex independent schools. And it's delightful to be here, to have encountered these two fellas and to begin to talk about what we would like to give back to the next generation of successful workers and leaders. We've had terrific feedback and encouragement from people out there who have critiqued us. Thank you for that. Keep listening. We listen to everything and talk about everything you give us. But today's topic is we're going to have a difficult conversation about difficult conversations. It's something that is often brought up in mentor one-to-ones and in coaching sessions, and they are some of the trickiest, most emotional things that we do in our jobs. Robin, give us a story. Give us a story about a difficult conversation you had to have in your professional
Well, actually, just
career.
while you were introducing the topic, I realised that there's much more to this than we probably originally thought, because, of course, you can be the instigator of a difficult conversation, or you can be the recipient of a difficult conversation. Sometimes you can go into a conversation knowing it's going to be difficult. Sometimes conversations become difficult.
Yes, nice.
And it's often those ones that you're sort of ill-prepared for. Just let me give you a couple of examples. I would say as a recipient, I think probably the most difficult conversation I had was a totally unexpected, very mediocre appraisal that I got one day. I went in thinking I was going to do really well. That wasn't the case. And I didn't take it well at all. Subsequently, I realised it was the best appraisal I'd ever had. But I must admit, I didn't deal with it very well. And I would say that was the most difficult one. In terms of instigating difficult conversations, I always felt redundancy situations when you were having to let people go, release them, particularly when they were unexpected. I always found those the most difficult, which unfortunately I had to do sort of multiple times during my career. But I think it's important. And then, of course, you also have the distinction between professional conversations and personal conversations. So many different elements we can go down. But I would say the very unexpected mediocre appraisal and the redundancy situations I used to find very, very difficult.
Tarek, have you been the recipient of a difficult conversation? Apart from this one.
Oh, this is really tough. I can't handle it.
Get that coffee out.
Actually, I'll tell you what. It was a beautiful one. I mean, it was difficult conversation because it was unexpected, but I learned so much from it. So just visualize this. So it was a conversation between me and my son. He was driving the car. We were in the car, and he was mumbling about his first leadership position and a particular person on his leadership team that he was having difficulty with, right? And so naturally, as a father, a caring father, I launched in with all the experience that I've got in leading teams, et cetera, et cetera. I launched into, oh, you should do this or you should do that and all that stuff, right? He was so, and I don't know where he got this from because it wasn't it wasn't from me. I didn't teach him this. He was so skillful at getting me to pause, and he had, he said these words: "I know you are coming from a place of love." Right?
A place of love.
So it was like,
Good line.
I stopped. I stopped in my tracks. And he said, I know you're coming from a place of love, but shouldn't you ask if I want feedback at this point? And I was like, oh my God, that's so good that he did that.
Wisdom of
I
the
went
young.
stum. I went completely stum, right? And so I said, okay, I respect that. And I left it, right? Months later, we were in the car again, and the same subject came up. And basically what he said was, he was basically saying he was having difficulty managing this person. I said, can I ask if this is the right time for me to share some feedback?
very
Would you
good.
receive that? And he said, yes,
Very
please.
good.
Yes, please. Right? So it was like, wow, okay, asking for permission to give feedback, especially with, I mean, a father-son relationship, father-daughter relationship, but equally, I think it's in any relationship, you should check. So that was a great learning experience for me. It was difficult because my first reaction is, what do you mean?
Yeah.
But he did it so skillfully. So I hats off to him. You know, I hope he listens to this podcast to realize
That
what
you
he
appreciated that. I mean, that
totally.
wisdom.
Totally.
That father
And
management process.
yeah, father management.
It is.
But you can sometimes also, I presume you can also do this in a slightly different words, but in a different context with a boss who's overbearing, who is trying to insist that you should do A, B, C, you know, giving you task orientation. So I think there's a skillful way of communicating that can be learned.
So
from that.
Tarek, does that mean that you think you should ask people permission before you give them feedback?
I think, actually, do you know what? You raise a very good point, because I think you should check if this is the right time. And, you know, and you should check from an emotional point of view, because you never know what's going on in their life. There could be a ton of other stuff going on.
That's right. That's right.
And yes, the feedback would be appreciated, but maybe not at that particular point in time. Right?
But I guess that presents challenges, right? Because obviously, as a boss, sometimes you might call somebody in for a difficult conversation, and if they say, "Well, no, actually, I'm not ready for it now," you can't always kick the can down the road, can you?
No. What I'm suggesting, Robin, is that you are checking what's going on in their life at that particular point in time before you say, I want to have this conversation, right?
Sure.
And actually, that reminds me of something I think several times it happened to me. It's like when you're having that sort of appraisal discussion, and the person that's giving you the appraisal is going on and you don't know where this is going to go. That's worse. That's torture.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, you know, if you've checked that this is the right time to have this conversation, get to the point at the beginning. And then go through the rationale of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because people that drag this thing on because they think it's painful, it's worse.
Yes.
I think.
No, agreed. How about you, John?
Yeah, I just want to pick up the points you just made. We could go into a conversation and ask, are you ready for this conversation? Because you don't understand what's happening in the background or what's happening at home, etc. But if you do know that they've just had a bad sales conversation or a difficult conversation with somebody in their team, and there's something that's fairly commonly known, and you still go into that conversation, you make the error of not being sensitive to things you already knew about. You should know I'm not in the right place for this conversation right now, and that will devalue any impact you want to have in that conversation, because they will think you don't really care, and they don't care about what you know until they know that you care. And I think it's a very clever thing you just said. Location, timing, think about where they are, all the things you know, then gather the unknowns by asking them. I think those are very good strategies. Absolutely.
I think empathy is what you're referring to, John.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's critical. If you feel, I may not necessarily agree with the what they've done or what they're not doing or whatever it is, but just the fact that they're being cared for, appreciated, or there's empathy, that carries the time, because it means that you're coming from a place of care,
Yeah.
right? You want to see them improve or whatever.
It's tricky though, isn't it? Because if I go, and I don't want to keep returning to this particular one, but in a, let's say, a redundancy situation, which we all have to face when you make someone redundant.
Right.
You know, those conversations, in my experience, are made deliberately cold. And they're made cold by HR because you're given a specific script and you're actually told not to engage with the individual. You read your script and then you leave the room. And typically that person is left with the HR function because there are so many legal ramifications of saying the wrong thing, etc.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I guess my point is there are some occasions where actually you can't be that emotionally attached. You have to step back and be relatively cold about things. But as I said, there are so many different types of difficult conversations, and we can actually devote a session to almost every single one of them.
You could.
Because a redundancy conversation is very difficult to a performance issue, which is very different to an appraisal situation. So lots of different scenarios. Perhaps they each require a slightly different approach.
Yes. There are nuances, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I had to let go somebody very senior here in the UK, and of course all the labor laws and HR freaking out, you know, we're going to get sued for ageism or whatever. And the approach that I took is I did my research on the individual.
Sure.
You know, there was profiles, and this person had something called significance, which meant that it's very important for them how they are seen. So I treated the individual with a lot of dignity. I asked a lot about what, you know, how he felt the role was going, his leadership was going, et cetera, et cetera. And in the end, he admitted, he said, look, he doesn't like what he's doing and he doesn't think he's doing a great job. So he actually admitted. And I basically said, listen, why don't you, I mean, after months, this is, you know, look for another role inside the organization first. Nothing came up. And then eventually I said, look, it's painful for you. It's painful for everybody around you. Why don't I let you write your own leaving notes the way you want to, because it's important for him to how he's seen. And I'm happy to put a recommendation for you wherever you want to go, right? And he wanted to leave as a good leaver in the organization, so he retains his shares or whatever. And we did all of that. HR were flummoxed because I didn't follow their script. But I treated the individual with dignity, and he appreciated, and he left the organization with no issues, and he succeeded where he went, because he was a great guy, but in the wrong role in the wrong organization. And
So John, let me sort of put you on the spot and touch on a point that Tarek made. Can you think of maybe a difficult conversation you've had where you were the instigator, but you weren't prepared? You had given it the thought that Tarek gave. You went into it, and halfway through you realised, actually, I'm not prepared. I've not got my examples. I haven't really thought this conversation through.
There are standard processes that Robin's just referred to on about redundancy, but there are some real left field stuff that comes your way, which you have to be ready for. We lost a student, a former student who'd gone on a gap year experience, had just left the school, and they were far, far away in South America, and they'd been killed in the car in a road accident that was very peculiar because a bus had been hit by a lorry in South America, and a number of kids had been killed, including our former student, who was an absolute delight, a wonderful person. And the next morning, the family couldn't cope with this, of course, in the first instance. I went to work early. By the time I looked out of my window at 8 o'clock, I had Sky News TV, I had BBC News Night TV all outside the front of the school, and I was doing live to camera all day about this student because it was a very noteworthy story, and it was a exhausting day, and I was on my nerve ends throughout the whole thing because somebody had to fill the void, and the family couldn't do that, and I was completely understanding of that, and then the family were able then later in the week to do something. So there can be some very left field things that come your way, and I sometimes think that being unprepared, you should have the guts to say, I really don't think I'm ready for the rest of this conversation just yet. You brought up new information, and I feel to honour what you've just said. Would you mind if I had some time to reflect? So I would do justice to what you've given me and the information that you've raised. I don't think you should have any fear about doing that. Of course, you're all keyed up. The thing about us as leaders, we want to tick boxes, solve problems, move on, get it done. And sometimes that's not the right instinct. Sometimes the right instinct is to say, I'm going to prolong the agony for myself here, but I want to go through what you said, and we'll meet again in 2 days' time, and we'll give this a better airing because you've given me something I didn't have before. So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. But of course, as we've already said, these things come in different circumstances, different packages. You've got to learn how to think on your feet in all these circumstances, because even in an appraisal situation, things can come up which you're not expecting.
I think, John, what you're referring to is a very important fact as a leader, is that you don't lose touch of your humanity. And so you can't go wrong, I think, in life, in work, or whatever it is, if you continuously stay in touch with your humanity. Because as you said, if the issue is you're unprepared or such dramatic, important information has come to light, you should take a pause and you should be in touch with your humanity and that empathy with the other person. Then you may still go back and do it in a different, much more skillfully, in a different way, right? But I think where a lot of leaders get lost is when they switch off the humanity part or put on such a strong filter and they just execute like a robot, right? Because eventually that will, even if nothing happens to your career, it'll eventually come back to haunt you. Was that the right thing to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I think being in touch with humanity is such an important factor throughout your career, throughout your life.
I find this a very, very interesting conversation. So this is going to be number one, by the way, on our podcast list. So let me ask you, one thing most people do with difficult conversations is they delay them. They put them off. They're difficult, etc. What tools did you use to ensure you didn't delay the difficult conversation? Apart from just doing it, what do you do to avoid it? To make sure you made that call, you had that difficult conversation.
How to avoid procrastination.
How to avoid
do
procrastination.
Yeah, I have a mental switch in my mind, and it is. I use a phrase. I've now crossed the line. I've heard all I need to hear. That's a really important thing before we have a hard conversation, by the way. Gather your evidence. Hear everybody. Now, fellas, and let me, again, be schooly with you. I've made hard conversations with staff. I've also made hard conversations with students. We've had to ask students to leave a school. And there is no avoiding that scenario when you're a school leader. These things come up, and you have to have a proper way of doing things. Gather evidence. Hear everybody, even though you've read every document that's been written by the investigator, you've read the submissions by the parents, you get them in, you're sitting in the study, hear everybody again. Hear them. Give them the space and the time to say what they want to say. And then you ask the parent and the child to leave the room, and whether you're deputy or your whatever person you're dealing with, HR, you then make a call. But I think you need to know when you've gathered all the evidence and you can make a fair conclusion, and you've ticked a massive box. The method is being consistent with our policy. Our policy says these 20 steps have to be taken. You've taken all 20 steps, so your method has been appropriate. You've got to the line, and then I think to myself, I've crossed the line.
So it's almost so because you're well prepared, you're then ready.
Yes. Yeah. And then you'll never be better ready. So do it, because then everybody feels better when a judgment has been made, and they know then they can move on to whatever happens next.
Yeah, adding to what John just said, I mean, under postponing or delaying or kicking the can down the road of a difficult conversation, I think I agree with you 100% that doing your homework, making sure you've listened to everybody, including the individual you want to talk to, because sometimes you're getting a 360 perspective may not necessarily include the individual's perspective. There may be other circumstances, so listening to them as well, I think, and fairly. Here's the difficult thing to do when you're gathering evidence, because sometimes we jump to a conclusion. Let's just get the supporting evidence for this conclusion. Yeah. The reality is, the difficult bit is to become an observer while suspending judgment. All right? So gathering the data without actually creating it and putting all the facts, if you will, together, including what you hear from the individual. I think my commitment, if you will, to have that conversation once you've gathered all the data is usually through booking a meeting slot with the individual. Because once you've done that, there's no going back. You're not going to not have the conversation.
That's right.
You put it in their calendar, your calendar, whatever it is, and then that's it. You got to do it. Now, you have butterflies in your stomach. You're going to go out for a walk around the building, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But at 11 o'clock, you're going to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So it's almost forcing yourself, Robin, to sort of commit to that date and not procrastinate or delay, if you will.
I think that what I used to remind myself of is often a difficult conversation ultimately benefits the recipient.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And remind yourself that, some of the most difficult conversations I've had as a recipient have ultimately benefited me because they've made me realize that there are things that I need to work on. So I think, look, this is going to be difficult, but I actually think ultimately the person will benefit from it.
I'd like to pick up on that, Robin, because I think you're absolutely right. There's one thing here that's important is who's decided it's difficult. It's you've decided it's difficult in your head. And that's an emotional judgment, right? Because actually maybe it isn't difficult. Maybe this is, superb guidance, constructive feedback for the individual, whatever it is, it's what they needed. The opposite of that is when you don't give them any feedback and you surprise them at the end of the year or whatever. It's like, oh, you've had a pretty terrible year. It's like, wait a minute, you had 12 months to give me feedback. Why didn't you do that? So it's sometimes it's an important thing to have, and don't delay it and don't leave it. Is what I would say.
And also, there's no reason why you can't intersperse a difficult conversation with some positive points as well, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not all about negativity. It's not all about.
I think
negativity.
I want to talk about your walking around the building before the conversation sort of habit. I think you have to think one very important question: what am I doing this for?
Yeah.
This is because there has been chronic underperformance. This is because there is a corporate decision that has to be taken. There's a policy. There's a process. There's people are in danger. People are, because this situation has resulted in bullying and unhappiness. You've got to remind yourself, I am doing this on behalf of other people and on behalf of the organisation. I'm not doing this on behalf of myself. This is not some personal ego trip. I am charged as the leader to protect this organisation and protect its individuals too. And that's why I'm doing this. That's why it's important. And if you can't say, if you're thinking, actually, do you know what, it's not that important, or why am I making such a fuss about this, then maybe you shouldn't be having a difficult, maybe you should be doing it a different way. But I think if you have regard for your company, regard for your team, regard for your people, regard for your objectives and your policies and its standards and its values, if you don't back them as the leader and have that conversation, you're failing in your duty as a leader.
Let me throw a little wobbly here.
Go on then.
We like
so
wobblers.
we've always talked about the leader talking to somebody that's in their team, right? Now I had never intended to do this, but it was just the circumstances forced me into it. So I had to have a difficult conversation with my boss, and it was me giving her feedback. So
Tricky.
So I would put it under the banner of courage, right? And so the situation was this, and she's a great friend. She's a lovely friend. And now, at the point in time, we didn't know each other that well. This was in Singapore. And you know how it is. Your weekends, you want to do stuff, right? Now, she had this habit of bombarding me and others with tons of emails over the weekend. So, of course, she's the boss. She's important, et cetera, et cetera. So you run around trying to respond and sort out all these emails. And basically, I loved mountain biking. I didn't get to do it, right? And this went on for months. It really annoyed me. And so at one stage, we had the conversation where I said, you send these emails on Friday night or Saturday morning, and this is what I said is, this is how I feel.
Yeah, good one.
And the reaction is that I don't go and do my mountain biking, which is my meditation, my reflection time, etc., whatever, and I respond to your emails. And the response I got from her was, wait, that's not my intention at all. I'm just clearing my desk. I just want to, so that I come in on Monday, I want everything already all sorted. You do not need to respond to these emails over the weekend. right? Wow, what a relief.
Yeah.
And we had a great relationship going forward because it was no longer tension, right? But most people will not have that conversation and will continue to hate the boss and continue to, destroy their weekends. So
No, that's
it
a good
is,
point.
sometimes it takes courage. Just have a conversation.
So just to go back to what you said, obviously sometimes you have a difficult conversation where you have the real conviction that you're applying right, you're applying company policy, etc. Absolutely agree with you. But have you ever been in a scenario where you've had to have a difficult conversation that's been forced upon you, where perhaps you don't ultimately believe it's the right thing? You don't it's not ultimately following company policy, where you're being forced to do something by a boss, which ultimately you don't believe in. Maybe it could be you're being asked to make someone redundant who you actually believe has performed very well. You're being asked to take someone up on a performance issue when actually you don't actually believe it's a problem, but other people do. So you have to go into that conversation without that personal conviction that it's necessarily the right thing to do. Or Tarek or John, have you ever been put in that situation
I
before?
can't think of one like that. I have to say, I would do a Robin, a Tarek, sorry, and I would. I've lived in very schools are places where you can get to the boss and talk to the boss quite easily. And if the boss was forcing me to do something, the doors were always open with heads that I worked for, and they would listen. They would listen to me, and they would respect that. And I think that's how I do it. I wouldn't do that to somebody else as a leader. I wouldn't make them do something they didn't believe in. I can't think of an instance where I was compromised in that way.
I would really push back, Robin. I mean, and to the extent that I would be prepared if I really believed that this was an injustice, right, being carried out, and I was going to be the instrument of carrying out that injustice, I would push back to the degree that if it harmed my position, career, whatever it is, that's fine. Because there are certain morals and certain principles and values or whatever that you live by. And I think if you let go of those, then you're completely lost.
But
now,
what if it wasn't something as deep? What about if it wasn't something as deep as an injustice? I'm talking about a debate around.
I think Robin's got one here.
No.
Robin, come on now, talk to us. We're helping you here.
We're always taught by coaches not to do this, as a coach not to do this, right?
Well, we're going to just break that code for a second. You want to share something, don't you? Come on.
No,
spit it out.
No, I you know what? I totally agree with you. If it's something as strong as injustice, but I've certainly been in situations in my career where I've had to release people who I personally don't think should be on the list.
Oh boy, that's
and
tough. How did you manage that?
And whether that's an injustice or not, but it comes down to a disagreement as to who the people are who should be on the list and who shouldn't be on the list. Sometimes I've released people who I think absolutely they should go, but there are other situations where I've not been of that conviction. I've still had to do it, whether that's been obvious to the person. So it can happen, but whether that's an injustice or not, I'm not quite sure. Maybe that's business.
I find that extraordinary that you were not part of the. It sounds like I'm going to extrapolate a little bit here. It sounds like you were not part of the decision-making process to make person X redundant, but you were then. They had that little conversation in the room somewhere, and then you were brought in to say, right, you're going to go and do it. Were you not part of that initial conversation? Were you not?
No, I think on occasion I was, but you didn't necessarily agree with the decision.
But but that's totally different. If you've been in a room with four people and you've actually thrashed through it, you've been heard, you've had your objections listened to, and they've been sensibly rebuffed or argued against, or you've been given different context. That's slightly different from being ordered to do something.
No, I agree. That's a good distinction.
Look,
I agree.
Robin has a point. Sometimes, let's say in an organization, for whatever financial reasons, you have to cut costs, right? Because always the CFO or the finance teams will tell you that the guaranteed thing that you can control, the controllable, is cost, right? Not necessarily the revenue side. So if they force you to cut costs, now you can cut travel, you can cut lots of other things, sponsorship for, conferences, blah, 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 all that stuff. Once you've cut all these things away, and then you're beginning to get into the people. The people that you might be actually laying off or making redundant are not bad people, but they're not your top performers. So you're almost like ranking people, force ranking people, and you're saying, okay, the middle and the bottom, that's where I have to go. the conversations there have to be with empathy, with dignity, saying, at this point, it's not your fault. It's nothing to do with you, but that's the organization, what it's going through, et cetera, et cetera. Now, does it make it less painful? No. But, I mean, sometimes you have to do it as a leader. You have to have the courage to have those conversations to say, this is where the organization is, and that's where we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, the other example, which you guys must have dealt with, was the dreaded false calibration during appraisals, where you're required to give someone an appraisal rating, or collectively you agree on an appraisal rating, which perhaps you actually don't agree with. But calibration forces you to have that conversation. So I agree with you, John. You've discussed it, but on occasion you might just leave that room still slightly uneasy with the decision, but you have to live with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Fellas, I'm going to sort of draw this to a close because I think we've said lots of things that probably have been food for thought for all three of us, if not for people listening to us today. I'm going to ask Robin in a second to sum up what we've talked about. But before I do that, I didn't quite get my chance to give you my awkward conversation at the start. So I'm going to give it to you now. And it was one of the best conversations I ever had. And it was unique because the person who gave it to me hardly ever gave me advice. And that was from my own father. And I was 10 years old. I played in a football match one evening. If we won it, we won the league. If we didn't win it, we wouldn't win the league. And we lost. And my father brought me home and he said to me, "You have no passion. You have no fire in your belly."
So I'd never say that of you, John.
Well, there you wouldn't say it now. I spent my career being Mr. Passionate, Mr. Energy, Mr. Driver, Mr. Energizer. But my dad said to me, "You don't want it badly enough." Boy, that hit me. And look, now my father passed away in July last year, and I gave this speech at his funeral. And I cried when I said it because it was so powerful. I've used it with students about how they discover the fire in their belly. I'm looking at his watch and his ring on the desk right now because he's always been an inspiration to me in that piece of advice. He never really advised me at all, but that was the thing that stuck out in my mind. And that truth has shaped my life, I have to say. Robin, what have we talked about today?
So today, and actually, guys, you'll be really impressed because you won't have seen me do this before, is I've actually taken a couple of notes.
Wow.
Which I'm going to read from, which I don't typically do with this thing
Brilliant.
called a pen. So I think we've had a great conversation about one of the most difficult topics that we all have to contend with in the corporate environment, which is having difficult conversations. So one really useful topic, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. So this let me sum up some of the points I've written down. I think empathy has come through, and acceptance that sometimes conversations are difficult, and when they're no longer difficult, maybe you need to ask questions of yourself, right? So empathy. Be well prepared. Don't go into conversations and make comments that you can't back up with true examples. So be well prepared. Don't procrastinate. As you said, John, be well prepared and make it happen, because ultimately that conversation is for the benefit of you, but also the individual concerned. And by avoiding them, you're ultimately doing that person probably a disservice, because that person can learn as much from that conversation as you can. And of course, you can sometimes be an instigator of a difficult conversation. You can sometimes be a recipient. And sometimes those conversations become difficult in a very unexpected way. I've been into conversations that I thought were going to be difficult, and they weren't. I've been into conversations that I thought were going to be easy that have become difficult. So they're my sort of takeaways. But guys, please add anything if I've missed anything.
Thank you, Robin. We are going to bring you more topics of discussion going forwards: managing fear, developing trust, how to coach, how to find the right coach and rewire yourself, self-management and managing stress and executive loneliness. We're going to talk to you about the art of delegation, or when to make the next move, how you manage Q&As, managing the press, teams and leadership, walking the floor, cultural items. We've got lots of topics lined up, but we'd like to know what interests you out there. Send us questions. Our email address is in the notes to this podcast. We're at all the major platforms. And let us know what you want to talk about and questions that you want us to answer. And we hope we should do those. We shall also be inviting guests to join us. We've got a little shortlist now of developing of exciting people to talk to share their experiences to, and bring some fresh perspectives from our own. So do tune in for those. And be aware that we are all still active, and we are all still available to you if you want to use us in any way. We are people who know how to train, we know how to coach, we know how to mentor, we know how to share our wisdom. So if you want to come our way at some point, get in touch, because we are very keen to help people and businesses fly. Thank you for listening. It's been great to have your company. We'll be with you again very soon. And as I say, stay in touch and give us your questions. Have a good day.